Welcome to Career Tools. This week, Resume Update 2020, Part 2. The questions this cast answers are: what's your new resume guidance for 2020? What should I change on my resume for 2020? And how should I deal with a gap in employment on my resume?
Hey, did you hear? With our latest edition of a virtual Effective Hiring Manager conference, all three of our conference events, EMC, ECC, and EHMC, can now be attended virtually. The first Effective Hiring Manager conference will take place August 24th and 25th and will be delivered in 2 half-day sessions. Check it out at manager-tools.com/training to register today.
The next thing we're going to talk about is don't try to cover up layoffs or gaps in your employment. We talked about being disingenuous, but changing your job history on your resume is unethical. Covering up a gap in employment, however you do it, is lying. When you're found out, you'll be fired, which would be worse than having the gap in the first place. Your history is your history. You can't change it. You can't change what's happened or where you worked, who you worked for, how much success you had. Does it sometimes make finding your next position harder? Yes, sometimes. The answer, though, isn't to change your resume to look better. All you can do now is work hard to get the job that you want or a stepping stone to that job, and then excel there.
As you said that, it suddenly occurred to me, it's like being divorced and then dating again and not saying that you've been divorced. You know, there's a stigma, which is probably unfair against people that have been divorced. And some people will immediately say, no, I'm not going to date you if you've been married before. Not going to. Some people will say, yes, but I'm going to be wary because, you know, there's obviously something wrong with you. And some people will say, I'm divorced too. It's fine. What most of us, I hope, would say is not, oh, just don't tell them that you've ever been married before. Just be like, wait until you're married this time and then tell them. Like, that would be a bad thing. And that's kind of what's happening here. You don't get the job and then say, oh, by the way, I was fired, I was laid off. Or, by the way, you know, that gap that doesn't look like a gap on my resume? Yeah, it's actually a gap. That's not what you do. You deal with the circumstances you have.
Also, and I know that this is just probably something everybody already knows, if you put something on your resume that's not totally true, there's no way you can keep that secret forever. I mean, just your language and the stuff that happens, like your experiences. Oh gosh, it's just so not cool. Not cool. You have to be honest and remind yourself that everyone has a different bit of history. I would say 99% of the people I know have been fired, have had a gap. Maybe the gap number is, you know, fewer people have had gaps, but some people do, and it's fine. Those people have new jobs. It's going to be okay. It's not going to be okay if you try to cover up something that is true in order to, you know, put yourself in a different position than you are now. It's not going to help you, and it's going to make things harder and at some point worse. And please don't do it. Please don't do it. You may have lost your job for any number of reasons. And if you lost your job due to an economic crisis, you'll understand that, you'll find that hiring managers understand it wasn't your performance that caused the separation, but the circumstances of the economy. Hiring managers remember 2001 and 2008, and they will remember 2020. Some of us are going to be in this position soon, maybe, and that will be a perfectly acceptable reason to have a gap. If your industry or geographic location had an economic crisis, even a small one that led to your layoff, hiring managers will know and understand. You don't need to feel shame or fear if you've been laid off, even if it wasn't during one of those crises. The situation is understandable. The tough love part, the tough love thing that we need to say is the quicker you can get over these feelings, the faster you'll be interviewing effectively.
Yeah, the worse you feel, the worse you interview. It's a bit like dating again, desperation shows. We're talking here about layoffs and how they're not your fault and it's not about your performance. But just to make everybody feel better, I've been fired. Mark's been fired. A number of people we know have been fired.
I've been fired. And sort of laid off.
Yeah, me too. When I was fired, I went to interview for another job. And we have advice, we have a guidance, we have a cast that tells you what to say when you've been fired. And that's what I did. I had this kind of 1-sentence summary of what happened, and I'm looking forward to, moving on to something new. And the person I was interviewing with wanted to delve into exactly what had happened and why I'd been fired. And so I told her, because I had nothing to hide and I didn't want to hide it either, a la being divorced. And so I told her, and she looked at me straight in the eye and she went, "Oh God, they're weird." Okay, next question. and I kind of sat there and thought, did I just get away with that? But, the situation didn't make sense to her in the same way it didn't make sense to me, to be fair. And she just moved on, even though she knew exactly the details of what had happened. So you will be surprised at how willing people are to forgive you, whether you've been fired or laid off, how much sympathy people will have for you, how much understanding. Hiring managers and recruiters don't go into interviews trying to catch you out or trying to make life hard for you. Even though we say the purpose of an interview is to find a reason to say no, we don't condone doing that in a nasty way or tricking candidates. What you should have is a pleasant conversation. And if there's something that means you're not going to fit into that job, then you don't do that job. And that's, as the candidate, that's to your benefit too, because being a round peg in a square hole is miserable. So it's better to be rejected from that job because you don't want that misery for 2 years. But that said, hiring managers and interviewers and recruiters go into interviews wanting to find the right candidate. They want a positive outcome. And so they want to support you. Whenever I interviewed, I could see that somebody was upset about something or they were embarrassed. It just hurt my heart because I could see that they weren't interviewing as well as they could. And therefore, they weren't giving themselves the best chance of getting the job we were interviewing for. And that's why I do this. It's because I don't want people to feel that way, because it was horrible to watch. And it just made me feel sad that the talent was being wasted. So whether you've been laid off or fired or separated from your job for any other reason, it's your history and you have to deal with it. But believe that people want the best for you and they want to hire you. God, that all went a bit woo-woo. Sorry.
No, you're good. Also consider that most people don't have a perfect track record, perfect resume. So many of us have been in these scenarios. And the longer your career goes on, the more likely that it is that one of those two things will happen to you. So remember that you're not the only person who's ever been in that scenario. In fact, probably the person sitting across from you has as well.
Yes,
give yourself that grace and focus on moving past that situation so that you can interview well and be, presenting yourself well. And that will show that you're a person who can overcome. Now, we're not saying that you can imply that you were laid off if you were fired. Even if the timing makes it easy, if you were fired in 2008, you can't imply that you were laid off. We don't condone unethical behavior. And frankly, that's unethical to imply something that isn't quite true, even should you think it paints you in a better light. Still your history. Let's be truthful. We all have things to overcome. So what this really means is you have to include months and years on your resume. You can't, try to blur the lines by, 2020 to 2020, when it was January to 2020 to December of 2020 that you were not employed. It's unethical to not include months and years on your resume. And everyone who reads resumes frequently knows about this trick anyway. They're smarter than that. They know when you put 2012 to 2013 on your resume, implying that you were at a role for 2 years when you were actually there for like 2 months, December 2012 to January 2013, you are fooling no one. It's so obvious that the only reason to leave those dates off would be to hide something.
Exactly.
It's almost like it's like a spotlight.
Yeah, it's like a big red sign.
Uh-huh.
Think of it not maybe about the dates, But think of the difference between 2 months experience doing something and 2 years experience doing something. There is a big difference between two people who have two years versus 2 months of experience doing something. I think of Cassie, who recently joined, actually not that recently now, recently joined our team. And one of the roles that everybody gets is answering our customer service queue. Everybody does it, including Mark and Mike. And what happens is when we get someone new, when Cassie started, she would ask me questions. I don't know what to do about this. This person says this. They can't get into their account. They can't do this. They can't find this. They're trying to do X and I don't know how to answer. If I think now, I don't know when she joined us, October time. Within the first 2 months, there were 10 of those questions a day. Now there's no questions because she's been doing the job for 8 months. The difference between the experience of 2 months and 2 years is huge. And if you don't have the experience that you're claiming, you're going to do worse at that job. If you get it by, under false pretenses, you're just going to do a bad job, and that's going to make you miserable all over again. So it makes no sense to try and hide how long any job lasted.
2 months at any role, the first 2 months at any role are essentially just crisis mode for your learning. It's a learning curve. 2 years at any job is enough to have competency. But those first 2 months, even if you've done the job before, you're learning about the office, you're learning about the people, you're learning the new systems, just any switch at all. Even honestly, in an internal role, if you shifted roles, if you made like a lateral move, those first 2 months, in my experience, are just trying to keep your head above water. So saying that you were there, or implying via dates that you were there for 2 years, when you were there for 2 months, is quite honestly, again, disingenuous. It's unethical. It is not a bold-faced lie, but
it's against your own interest, because
for sure,
the job you are trying to get needs 2 years experience and you don't have it, you won't do a good job.
This is going to sound like a huge tangent. I don't think that it is, but recently I was talking to someone about this show Yellowstone that I'm watching, which I think a lot of people are watching. And the reason I bring it up is because we were talking about riding horses. Imagine if you had been riding horses for 2 months versus 2 years. If you've ever been on a horse, that's pretty serious. So even in that simple of a situation, your experience level and your know-how and the speed at which you perform things, it's just not the same thing. And it's not going to do you any good. It's just going to make your life harder and put you in a position where the expectations upon you are high in a way that is not maybe something that you can accomplish, quite frankly. Like, it's just not helpful.
Your own life suck.
Right.
Okay.
Right. Which also leads us to don't write current on your resume about a role if you're not there any longer. We see this a lot.
Yeah. So candidates who left their employer in January and who are still writing December 15th to current in July, as if they were still there between January and July. You weren't there. Unless you are still being paid by that employer, you are no longer working for them. It's a very simple equation.
Right.
Writing current, if you're not being paid by that person, by that company, is unethical. Easy.
Yeah. Don't do it. Also, don't make up freelance work. One, I guess, common way that people try to cover up a gap is to claim that you're doing something freelance or doing consulting. And maybe you did. Maybe you did do a couple of things for a friend. Maybe you didn't. Just remember that when it comes to the interview, you're potentially going to have to talk about those jobs, those, not quite honest jobs in detail. And if you get the offer, your potential employer is going to call those people for references, maybe.
Right. And even if your friend has been primed, are they really going to answer that question well?
Not in a way that will help that employer know if you're competent, I don't think.
No.
I mean, it's not like your friend is, gosh, I don't know. I'm not even going to try to describe what I was going to say because it's not helpful. If you're doing something that's actually freelance, it would be fine to put it on there. However, don't use something that's sort of true to cover up a gap in your resume. In all of the cases that we're describing, if you get found out, the new employer won't reject your candidacy because you're not qualified or even because you had a gap on your resume, two things which you can do nothing about. They'll reject it because you lied. And that's something you can fix. You don't have to lie in the first place. So losing a job because of something that's outside of your control is one thing, but losing a job because you made a mistake on purpose to try to cover up something that was outside your control, I can't imagine feeling good about that for myself. Like I can't imagine being like, yeah, I lost this job and not just feeling like I did it to myself, which of course, it's exactly what we're describing. You totally did. Looking for a way to improve the relationship between your managers and their directs? If you've listened to our guidance, you probably already know the single most important managerial tool is one-on-ones. Let us spend 2 hours with your team in a virtual delivery over Zoom to explain the whys, hows, and the data behind why one-on-ones work and how your managers can actually get more time back on their calendars. For $5,000, we'll train up to 40 of your managers with this unique delivery. Contact Maggie at manager-tools.com or check it out on our website at manager-tools.com/organizations.
Okay, let's talk about something a little happier. So adding continuing education to your resume. And one of the very common recommendations for using your downtime during COVID-19 or because you've been laid off is learn something new. And I've seen all sorts of things from professional skills like project management to fun things like interior design. I seem to see a Skillshare advert every time I turn around. Skillshare, learn something new. And I have a Skillshare account. I like learning things new, and continuing education in and of itself, of course, is not a bad thing. Education and upskilling yourself in a period when you have more time, whether it's taking courses or reading books or hands-on practice, is a really good thing to do, and it's never a waste of time. Even learning fun topics reminds you how to learn. If you haven't been in school for 10 years, actually, you have to remember how to learn things. It's a weird experience. If you're in school right now, you're like, I don't understand how I could ever forget this. Believe me, you can forget it. It's weird. Yeah. As long as you're choosing a trusted source, you're choosing a source of learning that's credentialed or recommended, and you're not spending money that you don't have, especially if you've been laid off. Be careful about those $500 courses that are, just 5 payments of $100. Be careful of those if you don't have the money to invest. Outside of that, learn away. We absolutely want you to do that.
Yeah. There's so many cool things you could be learning. I ended up not using it, but there's something called edX, and it's basically like Ivy League universities, Harvard, MIT, Stanford. They're offering courses online, and they do this all the time. It's way pre-COVID. I took a edX cooking class, and lest you believe that it would be an easy thing to do, this was years ago when they first started it. I took a Harvard cooking class. They had me calibrate my oven. It was so serious. So I am genuinely suggesting that something like edX, Duolingo, all these languages people are learning right now. Mm-hmm. I'm actually studying for my sailing certificate, so I can take out boats and things like that.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, which of course I won't put on my resume. It's just that I'm bored at night when I've run out of television, right? But continuing education in and of itself is great, and we want you to engage in it. It's really important. It's a good instinct. It's never a waste of time. And choose a trusted source. edX is a great one. There's all kinds of resources out there. So much learning is free.
Oh, what you can learn on YouTube?
Oh my gosh, right?
Free is amazing. I have been painting, and I've been learning painting on YouTube for free. I mean, like, mental.
Yeah, it's fun.
All of that is important and a good thing to do.
Yeah.
And that said, doing a course, even one with a certificate, isn't the same as doing the activity in the real world. Just think about like new graduates. They have the most up-to-date learning. They haven't forgotten anything yet. And yet we don't treat them as the most valuable resource on our teams. If you get a new grad on your team, that person doesn't automatically become the team star, like the one person we go to. Wow, they remember those math equations that we've forgotten, so they must be the most valuable person. That's not how it works, because the experience of using the learning is as important as the learning. In fact, it's probably more than that. Like, the value of learning is probably 20%, and 80% of the value of learning is the experience of using it. And so what we want to be careful of is taking a load of courses, putting them on our resume, and thinking that that is the value. Right? If you have learning but no experience, it's not as valuable as you think it is.
It's fun to talk about this when you think about really simple examples like driving, or for example, my sailing course. Having a sailing textbook in my home that I study does not in any way give me the experience I need to take a boat out of a slip and put the sails up. That's very, very, very different. And you wouldn't give someone who's been studying the same, test, the same understanding as you would someone who's been doing it for years and years, because experience is 80% of it. You wouldn't give your car, to someone who's just read the driving laws textbook.
How many people say, I didn't learn to drive until after I passed my test? Everybody says that, because you don't learn to drive until, you learn to drive in this kind of rarefied atmosphere where weird things don't happen. I was in a car yesterday with somebody else driving, and somebody cut them off, came across them front ways and in front of them in the lane, and then braked, and the guy did an emergency stop in the middle of the freeway, and we went to a complete stop on the freeway. And that never happened when I was learning to drive, because they didn't let me on the freeway for a start.
Right.
So, I might have had my driving license, but I didn't know how to drive.
Yeah, when candidates don't understand this, we see on their resume long lists of courses they've taken or training they've been on, sometimes even books they've read, and no practical experience. And there's this kind of they think that the courses, the training, the book learning is of much greater value than that 20% that we actually think it represents. And so it can be a waste of space on your resume, because if you make that list too long, then what you're kind of saying is I know all this stuff, but I don't have any of that experience. And the experience is really 80%. So be judicious when choosing what continuing education you want to include on your resume, because having that learning isn't exactly the same thing as having the experience. And your resume should be a place where your experience is given room to shine, I guess. So there's some questions you can ask, right? You can ask yourself, is it directly relevant to the role that you want? Is it still relevant even if it was more than 2 years ago? And is the learning widely recognized in my industry? Like something like a PE, like a professional engineer's certificate and things like that. That would be different, because that is something that's directly relevant to a role you might be looking for. It works even if it's, a few years ago, and it's obviously very widely recognized. That's different than a class on CAD, right? They're two different things, and you have to consider the weight they each carry, and know that the weight of the learning is not the same thing as the weight of the experience. You wouldn't give someone who went to law school and hasn't done any cases your biggest case.
No. And that means the experience only has to be small to outweigh the learning. You just said, so if you've been to law school, okay, so we'll consider that 20% of the learning. If you had a 6-week internship with a judge, that would be close to outweighing the fact that you have 2 years of law school, if you haven't finished being a lawyer. If you have 1 year post your law degree, you already have more experience that outweighs those people who don't have any and have just finished law school. So one of the things that's very flattering, but not right, is people put their manager tools training, they've been to our effective manager course and they want to put that on their resume. But if you've done 6 months of managing, that's better than having been on the effective manager course, even though we think that's incredibly valuable because it's experience doing it. So don't look for something that's huge to outweigh the learning. You can go pretty small and still be outweighing the fact that you've done the learning, and push that off your resume for not being as good as the experience.
Absolutely. And when you ask yourself those questions, is it directly relevant to the role? Is it relevant if it was more than 2 years old, or is it widely recognized in the industry? If you answer any of those questions with a no, consider replacing it with that thing that's more relevant. In most cases, 3 examples of a type of education without experience is probably the limit before you start encountering those negatives of, I don't really have the experience, but I do have the learning. So it's a little bit of a balance, but keep in mind that continuing education is valuable and experience is a bit more valuable.
Right. And it's different for recent grads, like the whatever the word is before we get to continuing learning is sort of after graduation and non-school, like not a degree or a master's or a PhD or whatever. Continuing learning is sort of outside of that. It can be professional qualifications and it can be other things. But if you're in the grad section, if you've just graduated or you're doing a master's, then we have a different cast for you, which is called Resumes for Graduates, which covers that because yours is different because you only have learning and you don't have experience usually. If you have been learning something new and you want to find a place and you want to get some experience, one way to do that is to volunteer your skills for a nonprofit or a charity or a friend who has a small business or someone else's small business who can use your skills. If you've been learning web design, then there's a million charities who would be happy for you to redesign their website. And that gives you that practice, that experience that makes the learning more valuable to an employer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that you can actually put on a resume maybe.
Exactly.
Yeah. So we know that many of you are out of work as we write this in July of 2020. We hope that this guidance is helpful to you, and we invite you to go to our website and explore the many other podcasts and products we have to assist you, such as the Resume Workbook and our interviewing series of podcasts and content that we will, if you send us a note, we'll be glad to help you with and help you to get a hold of, because it is a tough time and we do want to be here for everyone. And we know that right now it might be a time when you're updating your resume. You may see the writing on the wall, or you may see that, things are changing swiftly. We are here to support you in that.
Yeah. And we had an incredible list of people who donated the interview series products and said, when someone writes to you and says, I need it, please, I will pay for it. Mm-hmm. So, and I believe we have some of those as of the day we're recording this, which is the 22nd of July. I believe we still have some. So please write us customerservice@manager-tools.com. We'll be happy to set you up with someone, assuming there's still people on that list. But those people were incredible. There was over 100 people who said, I will pay for it for someone else who needs it, which is just amazing. And please go to the forums because those amazing people are hanging out there and they will help you there too. So we want you to access the community as well as the guidance that we have. Thanks, Kate.
Thanks, Wendy.
That's all for this week. We'll be back next week with a new topic.